In October of 2011, the Elbert County Board of Commissioners voted unanimously to adjourn a public hearing. Not because business was concluded, but because they had nothing left to say. The man who silenced them was 78 years old, and he had done it with a single folded piece of paper. The paper was 124 years old. The man was Arthur Vance, and the hearing was about his dirt road. Then again, it was never really about the road. Let me tell you about the road first, because you have to understand it to understand what happened. It was not, by any modern definition, a road at all. It was a suggestion of a road, a 1.2-mile compression of earth and gravel that branched off County Road 117 and wound its way north to the Vance homestead. It was 16 feet wide in the generous sections, a bare 12 in the narrows, where two ancient cottonwoods, planted by Arthur's grandfather in 1919, stood sentinel. For 92 years, it had been maintained by the Vance family, graded twice a year, once after the spring thaw and once before the first snow, with a box blade pulled behind a John Deere 4020. New gravel, sourced from the dry creek bed on the property's western edge, was added every 7 or 8 years, depending on the severity of the winters. The road had a name, at least to the family. They called it the Trace. To the county, it was nothing. It was an unnumbered, unrecorded, and unofficial path. And in 2011, it became illegal. Arthur Vance was 78 years old, had farmed this specific 480-acre parcel of land for 61 of those years, and was known for two things: the straightness of his planting rows and the brevity of his sentences. He had inherited the farm not through a will, but through a lifetime of work. His father had inherited it the same way, from Arthur's grandfather, a man named Samuel Vance, who had purchased the original 160 acres from the railroad for $2.50 an acre in 1905. Samuel was 27 at the time. He and his wife Clara had built the original 2-room sod house with their own hands, 300 yards from the creek that provided their water. The trace was the first thing Samuel laid out. He followed the high ground, marking the path with stones, creating a route that would shed water naturally and avoid the low spots that turned to gumbo in the spring. He understood the land not as a grid, but as a living thing with veins and bones. The road was one of its arteries. Arthur had lived his entire life within the rhythm of that land. He knew its history not from books, but from the objects in his house. In the front room, there was a heavy oak table built by his grandfather from a tree cleared from the property's north pasture. It was held together with pegs, not nails, and had borne the weight of every significant family meal, every seed sorting session, every ledger entry for over a century. In his small office, there was a black metal deed box. It contained the original 1905 deed with its elegant cursive and brittle wax seal. It also contained birth certificates, marriage licenses, and the property tax receipts for every year since 1906, each one carefully bundled with twine. And it contained the ledgers. The ledgers were the farm's true memory. Let me tell you about the ledgers, because they are the heart of this story. They were simple, cloth-bound accounting books, one for each year starting in 1905. In them, Samuel, then his son Robert, then Arthur, had recorded everything. Not just income and expenses, but the details of a life lived in close negotiation with the earth. April 14th, 1936. Wind from the north since sunup. Sky is brown. Had to relight the lamp at noon. No field work. Mended harness. Brought the cows in close. July 22nd, 1965. Creek over its banks at 4 a.m. Lost 20 feet of the south bank. The trace held. Water came up to the east wheel rut but did not cross. Sam's high ground. May 3rd, 1982. 14 inches of wet snow. Heavy. Broke the top limb off the big cottonwood. Graded the trace for 3 hours in the afternoon. Neighbor John Miller came through for his feed at 5 p.m. His county road is still closed. These were not diaries. They were data. A century of lived empirical data recorded in pencil on acid-free paper. Arthur Vance did not have a degree in civil engineering, but he had something more substantial. He had the complete operational history of a 1.2-mile stretch of road recorded by the 3 men who had built and maintained it. He knew its precise load-bearing capacity in a wet May and its dust quotient in a dry August. He knew this not because he had modeled it, but because he had lived it. The trouble began in March of 2011 with the arrival of a manila envelope bearing the seal of Elbert County. The letter inside was from the Department of Planning and Development. It was polite, professional, and utterly disconnected from the reality of the Vance farm. It informed Arthur that a recent county-wide survey using modern GIS mapping technology had identified a number of unregulated private access routes. His road, the Trace, was one of them. Pursuant to Elbert County Ordinance 98-04, Section 3, Paragraph B, all private roads servicing a primary residence must be brought into compliance with county standards. It then listed the deficiencies. The road's width was substandard. The code required a 24-foot clear width for emergency vehicle access. The grade in one 200-foot section exceeded the maximum allowable 8% slope. The surface was non-compliant. A minimum of 4 inches of compacted road base was required. The letter concluded by informing him that he had 180 days to submit a remediation plan prepared by a licensed engineer. A preliminary cost estimate for the required upgrades was attached. The number at the bottom of the page was $184,000. If he failed to comply, the county would issue a notice of violation, followed by fines of up to $500 per day. Eventually, they could place a lien on his property. The man who signed the letter was Mark Kellerman. He was 42 years old, had been the Elbert County Planning Director for 11 months, and held a master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Colorado. He was a man who believed in systems, in codes, in the clean, rational order of a well-planned community. He had moved to Elbert County from a suburb of Denver, drawn by the promise of open space and the professional challenge of bringing modern planning practices to a rural county that had, in his view, been run on handshakes and habit for too long. He was not a villain. He was a true believer. He believed that standardized codes saved lives. He could show you charts correlating road width to fire truck response times and data sets on the failure rates of uncompacted road surfaces under heavy rainfall. He saw Arthur Vance's road not as a piece of history, but as a liability, a data point in the wrong column, a risk that needed to be managed. To Mark Kellerman, The map on his computer screen was more real than the land it represented. A week after the letter arrived, Kellerman's county-issued Ford Explorer made its way down the real County Road 117. Arthur watched it come. He was standing by his barn, wearing the same faded denim overalls he wore every day, his hands resting on a fence post his father had set in 1952. Kellerman parked where the trace met the county road, careful not to pull onto the dirt. He got out, a clipboard in his hand, wearing crisp khaki pants and a polo shirt with the county logo embroidered on the chest. He was athletic, confident, and he walked with the brisk stride of a man whose time is valuable. He introduced himself. Arthur nodded. He'd known who he was. "Mr. Vance," Kellerman began, his tone friendly, "I just wanted to follow up on the letter we sent. I find a face-to-face conversation can clear things up." Arthur said nothing. He just waited. Kellerman gestured toward the trace. "So, this is the access route in question. Our GIS data flagged it. It's not on the official county road map, which makes it a private drive by default. And the code is pretty clear on the standards for private drives." He explained the logic. It was about safety. What if a fire truck needed to get in? What if an ambulance had to get out in a blizzard? The standards were there for a reason, to protect residents, to protect the county from liability. It was a reasonable-sounding position, delivered with the smooth confidence of a man who had given this speech many times. When he was finished, Arthur shifted his weight. He looked at the road, then back at Kellerman. "Fire truck was up here last year," he said. His voice was raspy, unused to extended conversation. "Neighbor's grass fire. Got a little close to my north fence line. Made it up and back just fine." He paused. "That was in August. Dry." He then looked up at the sky as if consulting it. "In June of '95, we had that flash flood. Sheriff's deputy came up to check on us. Road was soft, but it held him. His car was a Crown Victoria. Weighed 4,100 pounds. Kellerman smiled, a tight, patient smile. "I appreciate that, Mr. Vance, but anecdotal evidence isn't really the issue. The code is the code. It's based on engineering principles, not stories." The word stories hung in the air. To Kellerman, it meant fiction. To Arthur, it meant data. Arthur looked down at his own hands, calloused and stained with the earth of this place. "This road," he said slowly, "was laid out to follow the land. Your code wants to fight the land. The land always wins." "The code doesn't fight the land," Kellerman countered, his voice still patient. "It ensures a predictable, safe interaction with it. We just need you to file a plan. We can even help you find qualified engineers." Arthur finally looked Kellerman directly in the eye. "You want me to spend $184,000 to fix a road that ain't broken, based on a map made by a satellite that can't tell the difference between solid ground and mud." He turned then and walked back toward his barn. The conversation was over. Kellerman stood there for a moment, clipboard in hand, a look of professional frustration on his face. He had come to solve a problem, to help a constituent see reason. He had failed. He got back in his Explorer and drove away, the dust from the county road settling on the unpaved, illegal, and, in his mind, doomed surface of the trace. The next few months were a slow escalation. A second letter arrived, this one certified, reiterating the county's position and setting a date for a public hearing. The hearing was a formality, a necessary step before the enforcement actions could begin. Arthur's grandson, David, came home from college in Fort Collins for a weekend. He was 22, studying agricultural business, and he loved his grandfather, but was mortified by his stubbornness. "Grandpa, you can't fight the county," David said, sitting at the old oak table. "They have lawyers. They have the law on their side. Just hire an engineer. Maybe we can get a variance, plead hardship." Arthur was cleaning a rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. "Truth doesn't need a lawyer," he said, not looking up. "And this ain't about hardship. It's about what's right." "What's right is following the rules," David said, his voice rising with the frustration of his generation, a generation that trusted systems, that believed in credentials and processes. "You're acting like this is still the Wild West. Kellerman's not a bad guy. He's just doing his job." Arthur finished with the rifle and set it aside. He looked at his grandson. "His job is to read a book of rules. My job is to know this land. The book is wrong." He went into his office and came back with one of the old ledgers. It was from 1948. He opened it to a page in May. "Your great-grandfather Robert wrote this," he said, pointing a thick finger at a line of script. "May 11th, 1948. County man came by, name of Henderson. Said we needed to put in a proper culvert where the trace crosses the low wash. Said the county would provide the pipe if we provided the labor. We did. Took 2 days. Henderson came back, looked it over, and said, 'Good work, Robert.' And that was it." Arthur closed the book. "That's how it used to be. A conversation, a partnership, not a threat." David sighed. He didn't understand. To him, the ledger was just an old book, a relic. His world was Excel spreadsheets and digital contracts. He saw his grandfather as a man out of time, clinging to a past that no longer existed. He was afraid his grandfather was going to lose the farm over a mile of dirt. Word got around the community. Other farmers, other old-timers who had their own versions of the trace, started paying attention. They saw Kellerman's initiative for what it was, the slow closing of a door on a way of life. The new people moving into the county, building their 5,000-square-foot houses on 35-acre ranchettes, they wanted paved roads and county services. They didn't understand the old ways, the informal agreements that had held the community together for a century. The hearing, scheduled for October 12th, became more than a zoning dispute. It became a line in the sand. Arthur prepared. He did not hire a lawyer. He did not commission a rival engineering study. He spent his evenings in his office with the deed box open on his desk. He went through the old papers one by one, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He read the tax receipts, the water rights filings, the original survey markers from the 1905 purchase. He read the ledgers, cross-referencing entries, building a timeline in his head. He was not looking for a loophole. He was looking for the root. He believed that if you went back far enough, the truth was always there, simple and solid. On the night of the hearing, the commissioner's meeting room was full. The usual dozen or so attendees had swelled to over 100. The room was a sea of plaid shirts, cowboy hats, and worried faces. The farmers and ranchers of Elbert County had turned out to watch one of their own face the modern world. Arthur Vance arrived with his grandson David. Arthur wore a clean work shirt and his good boots. He carried a worn, dark brown leather satchel that had belonged to his grandfather. It was a beautiful thing, made of thick, supple hide stitched by hand. It had carried deeds and cash and veterinarian supplies for 3 generations. Tonight, it carried Arthur's evidence. David looked uncomfortable, out of place among the old men. He was there to support his grandfather, but he was also there to witness a train wreck he felt powerless to stop. The hearing began at 7 p.m. sharp. The board consisted of 3 commissioners, all local businessmen who projected an air of weary authority. Mark Kellerman was first on the agenda. He strode to the podium, confident and prepared. He had a PowerPoint presentation. The first slide showed a high-resolution aerial map of the county, with the Vance property highlighted in red. The next slide zoomed in, showing the thin, wavering line of the trace. He had photos. He showed a picture of the narrow section between the cottonwoods, a tape measure stretched across it, showing a width of 13 feet 4 inches. He showed a shot of the steep grade, with a digital level superimposed on the image, reading 9.2%. He had charts and graphs. He presented the fire chief's official statement on minimum turning radii for ladder trucks. He presented the county engineer's report on soil instability. He spoke for 22 minutes. His presentation was a masterpiece of data-driven bureaucracy. It was clear, logical, and unassailable. He was not angry or accusatory. He was simply presenting the facts as his system understood them. In conclusion, he said, turning to the commissioners, the issue is one of public safety and county liability. The Vance property is served by a non-compliant access route. While we respect Mr. Vance's long history on the land, history does not exempt a property from the county's adopted safety standards. We recommend the board issue an order of compliance, giving the landowner 90 days to submit a professionally engineered plan for remediation. He sat down. A silence fell over the room. The chairman of the board, a man named Henderson, no relation to the Henderson from the 1948 ledger, a fact Arthur found grimly ironic, looked out over his glasses. "Mr. Vance," he said, "do you have a response?" Arthur stood up. He walked slowly to the podium, the leather satchel in his hand. The room was utterly still. He placed the satchel on the podium and opened the clasp. He didn't look at the commissioners. He didn't look at Kellerman. He looked at the people in the audience, his neighbors. He saw their faces, men and women he had known his entire life. He was not just speaking for himself. He began, his voice low but carrying in the quiet room. My family has lived on our land for 106 years. We've paid our taxes. We've helped our neighbors. We've minded our own business. He paused, letting the words settle. This road, the Trace, has been there longer than I have. It carried my grandfather's wagon, my father's first truck, and the ambulance that took my mother to the hospital for the last time. It has never failed us. Not in flood, not in blizzard, not in fire. He reached into the satchel. He did not pull out the ledgers. He did not pull out a competing engineering report. He pulled out a single large sheet of paper, folded into a small, neat square. It was yellowed with age, brittle at the creases. The audience leaned forward. David, his grandson, watched, his face a mask of anxiety. Arthur carefully unfolded the paper, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle. He spread it out on the podium. It was a map, hand-drawn in black ink with delicate, spidery lettering. "Mr. Kellerman," Arthur said, his voice level, "you are a man who respects data. You believe in official records. I do too. But you have to have the right records." He looked at the commissioners. "This is the official survey map of the territory of Colorado, Elbert County region, commissioned by the territorial legislature. It is dated 1887. A murmur went through the room. Kellerman, at his table, frowned, looking confused. The county attorney leaned forward, squinting at the document on the podium. Arthur placed a finger on a spot on the old map. "The county of Elbert," he said, "was incorporated in 1889, 2 years after this map was made. Your county records, the ones Mr. Kellerman has on his computer, they begin in 1972, when the planning department was first created. Before that, things were a bit more informal. But this," he tapped the map, "this is not informal. This was the law." He traced a faint line on the map with his finger. It was exactly where the trace ran. It connected a series of survey markers, following the high ground just as his grandfather had. Next to the line was a small, almost illegible notation. Arthur leaned down, squinting to read it, though he already knew the words by heart. He straightened up and looked directly at Mark Kellerman, who was now standing, a look of disbelief on his face. The notation here, written by the territorial surveyor, a man named Elias P. West, reads, "Public thoroughfare, designated by territorial mandate, 20-foot easement." "Mr. Kellerman," Arthur said, and his voice was not triumphant but matter-of-fact, the voice of a man stating a simple, undeniable truth. "Your county ordinance cannot decommission a road the state of Colorado established 2 years before your county existed. This road doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the public. And according to state law, it has been your job to maintain it for the last 122 years. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. The 3 commissioners stared at the map. The county attorney walked up to the podium, adjusted his glasses, and leaned over the ancient paper. He looked at it for a long time. He traced the line with his own finger, read the notation, and then straightened up. He looked at the commissioners and gave a single, almost imperceptible shrug. The argument was over. The law was the law, and this piece of paper was older and more powerful than any ordinance they could ever pass. Mark Kellerman stood frozen by his chair. His PowerPoint presentation, with its crisp, colorful, and utterly irrelevant data, was still glowing on the screen behind the commissioners' heads. His entire case, his entire worldview, had been dismantled by a piece of paper pulled from a dead man's satchel. He had brought a supercomputer to a fight he didn't understand, and he had lost to a man with a map. The chairman, Henderson, cleared his throat. He looked at Kellerman, then at Arthur, then at his fellow commissioners. He picked up his gavel. "This hearing," he announced, his voice strained, "is adjourned." He banged the gavel. The sound cracked through the silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, one by one, the people in the audience began to stand. They didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. It was not that kind of victory. It was a quiet, deeply felt vindication. A few of the old farmers walked past Arthur, patting him on the shoulder. David came up and stood beside his grandfather, his eyes shining. He looked at the old man and at the map, and for the first time in his life, he understood. He understood the ledgers, the deed box, the satchel. They were not relics. They were power. The aftermath was quiet but decisive. The The county attorney's office spent a week researching territorial law and historical survey records. They found that Arthur Vance was, in fact, correct. The document was authentic. A copy was supposed to have been in the county archives, but had been lost sometime in the 1950s, likely in a fire that had damaged the old courthouse. Legally, the road was a public right-of-way. The county was responsible for it. The following spring, a county road crew appeared at the end of the trace. Over the next month, they widened it to 20 feet, laid down 6 inches of compacted road base, and graded it smooth. The final cost to the county was $212,000. They even installed a new sign where it met the main road. The sign read, CR117B. The trace was now official. Arthur never called it that. To him, it was, and always would be, the trace. He still graded it himself after a hard rain. Mark Kellerman stayed on as planning director for another 18 months. He was a professional, and he did his job, but the certainty was gone from his eyes. He had learned a hard lesson, that the oldest data is sometimes the most accurate. In 2013, he resigned and took a job as deputy planning manager for the city of Lakewood, a suburb of Denver. It was a place where all the roads were paved, all the histories were short, and all the maps were digital. He was, by all accounts, very good at his job. Arthur Vance passed away in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 84. He died in the same house his grandfather had built, on the land he had never left. His funeral was held in the small community church, and the pews were filled with the same people who had packed the commissioner's room that night. His grandson, David, now 29, took over the farm. He had finished his degree, but his real education, he told people, had happened in that hearing room. He managed the farm with a laptop and a deep respect for the old ways. He continued to make entries in the yearly ledgers, his neat print alongside the spidery script of his great-grandfather and the blocky handwriting of his grandfather. In his office, on the wall behind his desk, he hung a framed, high-resolution photograph of the 1887 territorial map. It was a reminder that the deepest truths are often hidden in the oldest records. Let me tell you, finally, about that leather satchel. It was made in 1895 by Arthur's great-grandfather, who was a saddle maker before he was a farmer. He made it for himself, to carry his tools and papers. The leather came from a bull raised on their first homestead. The stitching was done with waxed linen thread, every hole punched by hand with an awl, every stitch pulled tight and locked. The bag outlived him. It was passed to his son, Samuel, who carried it to the bank in town to secure the loan for the 480 acres. It was passed to his son, Robert, who carried in it the telegram that said his own son, Arthur, was coming home from Korea. And it was passed to Arthur, who carried in it the map that saved the road. Today, David carries that same satchel. The leather is dark with the oil of 4 generations of hands. The clasp is worn smooth. He takes it to town meetings, to the bank, to the co-op. He doesn't always have important papers in it. Sometimes it just holds a sandwich and a bottle of water. But he carries it anyway. He carries it because he understands that what it truly holds is not paper, but weight. It is the accumulated weight of a family's knowledge, their resilience, their deep and abiding connection to a single piece of ground. It is the physical vessel of their story. In the end, the story of Arthur Vance and his road is not about a legal victory. It is about the nature of knowledge itself. The county, with its satellites and its software, believed knowledge was a product of modern technology. It was something new, fast, and digital. It could be captured, processed, and displayed on a screen. Arthur Vance knew that knowledge is not a product, but a process. It is the slow, patient accumulation of experience. It is the memory of the land, passed down from one mind to the next. The county saw a road as a set of specifications, a list of numbers for width and grade and compaction. Arthur saw the road as a story, a 124-year-long narrative of seasons and storms, of hardship and survival. What is official is not always what is true. What is written in a new code is not always as powerful as what was drawn in old ink. In a world that is rushing to digitize everything, to replace lived experience with algorithms, the most important data might still be stored in a dusty ledger, in a metal box, in the memory of an old man. The things that endure are not the ones that are most rigidly planned. They are the ones that have adapted to the ground they stand on. What survives is not the system. It is the trace.